shiny, more evident when light shines through it. And a nice, cool thing about volumetrics in Maxwell is that, you know, as soon as you add an emitter into a scene, it's going to spread through the volume, and also with environment lighting. So it works with any types of emitters, and also environment lighting, you know, HDR or physical sky, things like that. And soon, now that we've finished the version 3 release, we're concentrating now on adding some sort of density field format, either Field 3D or Open VDB, and probably it's going to be Open VDB. That's becoming a standard now. So let me show you one example with volumetrics about the light interacting naturally. So here is a scene I made really quickly, so you know it's not going to win any awards, but just to show you that this is the ship flying through these clouds and coming out of the clouds, and I added some emitter surfaces to it. And I'm going to show you more in detail here what I did to have this control over the multi-light in Maxwell inside After Effects. But for example, now I can turn off the environment lighting, for example, and let's say I can increase the exposure of the front emitters, and there's also an emitter back at the engine there, so I can maybe make it just a little bit stronger. You can see how nicely everything reacts in the scene. I didn't need to do anything specific to have that control. And also I can do that in post. I can change the light intensity after the rendering is done using multi-light, and it works great with volumetrics. And you can see how nice it looks as the ship goes through the clouds. You know, it's a very nice lighting interactions. And by the way, this cloud material, it was just simply a Lambert material, so it's nothing special about the shading here. And I can just show you quickly this scene so you can see how easy it is to set up. This was it. So I'm showing now the Maxwell plugin working through Softimage, but how you work with volumetrics and how you apply materials and stuff like that, it's pretty much identical between plugins. So I'm just using Softimage because I'm used to it. So here's that scene, and it's got an animated particle file, and it's about 1 million or so particles. It's not so many. And if I delete this attribute first, you can see how it renders without it. So here I'm using Maxwell Fire, the interactive preview engine, so I can preview my scene. And you can see that by default, it's just going to render these analytical spheres of each particle. Okay, it's not a volumetric yet. So sometimes that can be cool, so you can just apply any material to these little spheres here. You can see. And by the way, I'm using an i7 2600K, and I've got one of the cores running for the webinar. So really, it's not the fastest machine, but I mean, if you were on a workstation, on a Xeon workstation, this would be about 6 times or 5 times faster. Okay, so to make this particle file, this particle cloud into volumetrics, you simply add a property to it, which is the Maxwell volumetric modifier. And here you have some settings, and the first one you should pay attention to is the cell size. So this is basically the resolution of the volumetric object. And since the scene is so big, I'm going to make this smaller so I don't run out of memory, and I'm going to increase the radius a little bit of the particles. Let's see what that looks like. So again, I just have a regular Lambert material applied to this. I'll show you what it looks like. So this is the Maxwell material. This is it. It's just a, you know, a Lambert or almost Lambert. There's no glossiness. Also, it's just a white material. Okay, but even with that simple material, you can see you get this nice light scattering, this volumetric effect, and it reacts. You know, it interacts with all the lighting in the scene by default. So it's really easy to set up. And again, by using multi-light, when you turn that on from the render options, so just here you turn on multi-light, so you can get individual control over each of those lights in the scene. Yeah, so that's the first look at volumetrics. And again, with the upcoming OpenVDP support, that's going to be even more awesome because you can have a lot more detail here. You can see that I didn't use that many particles here to make more detailed clouds. But anyway, so that's a quick look at volumetrics. And next up is the motion blur. So we worked a lot on the motion blur in version 3 to make it much faster, especially when you're using motion blur and hair, or if you have many objects in the scene that all of them are motion blurred. It's many times faster now. So especially with hair, you're going to notice speed-ups of, well, in the most extreme cases, so when you have like millions of hairs and lots of heavy motion blur, you're going to see it up to 100 times faster. In this example, this is a student film from a 3D school here, and they have this animated cat with about 500,000 hairs. And compared to version 2 of Maxwell, this particular scene was 10 times faster. And so instead of 7.5 hours per frame, it was just 45 minutes per frame. So that's a pretty important speed up. And actually, just to show you how efficient it is, I can show you another example quickly. Well, I'm moving ahead of myself a little bit because I'm going to show you the Alembic support also, but just to show you the motion blur and how you can work with many different objects at the same time. So I'm going to load a Alembic object. And you load an Alembic object using the MXS references functionality, so you can either load a MXS reference or you can load an ABC file. So here I can choose, instead of an MXS reference, I can choose an ABC file, an Alembic file. And this is an animated file of a walker. You can see that I can scrub through the timeline and it loads each frame of that animation. And you have a few options here for the axis, which axis it should use, and the smoothing angle of the geometry, and so on. And also, if the Alembic file has material assignments in it, so it has a metadata of materials, it has a material name, and those materials are already in your scene and they have the same name as the materials specified in the Alembic file, then it's automatically going to apply those materials to the parts in the Alembic file. So it supports materials as well. And you get this preview in a point cloud. In Softimage at least, you get this preview as a point cloud of the geometry. So let's quickly do some fun stuff with this one. Let's make it smaller. And I'm just going to copy it a bunch of times. Basically making copies of this Alembic file. Let's see. Around this plane, so each of these objects are going to get motion blur when we render them. let's say, let's make about 100 of them. Okay, that's enough, I think. So let's see, find a cool angle. So all of these are animated now with motion blur. There are about 100 of them. Let's preview that in Fire. So you can see that the scene export is pretty fast. The preview rendering starts pretty fast, and again, this would be about 5 to 6 times faster on a dual Xeon machine. So you can see now that all the instances have motion blur, and you can also see the motion blur in Maxwell Fire, the preview engine. It supports motion blur as well. And of course we can render that. So that's loading all the objects from the Alembic file. Oops. I think I have too much memory, yeah. I have to close After Effects. I'm running out of RAM. Let's try that again. Sorry about that. I was running out of RAM because of After Effects. At least I hope that's what happened. Yeah, so now it's loading all the objects from each of the ABC files. And then it's going to start voxelizing the scene. And in this case, I'm using, I think, 10 motion blur steps. Actually, I had it off. I need to turn it on. Sorry. Okay, so now that's without, sorry, that's with motion blur. No, sorry, that's without. And if I turn it on, render again. So while I'm showing you Alembic functionality and motion blur at the same time, but Alembic import. Okay, so that's about 100 walkers with each of the pieces in the Alembic file having motion blur. You can see that renders pretty fast even on this machine. I mean, you can at least have a preview in a few seconds. In about 20 seconds, you get a very good idea what the lighting is going to look like and so on. And you can change the exposure in real time in version 3. So now in version 3, you don't have that little preview window anymore. You can do all these changes with scattering and so on. You can do them in real time in the main viewport, in the main render view. And this is accelerated by the graphics card actually. So the more RAM your graphics card has, the bigger the render you can hold here in the fast multi-light preview, the bigger the resolution you can have. Okay, so that's a quick look at the new motion blur version 3. And again, you're going to see the largest speed-ups when you're using especially hair and many millions of hairs. It's going to be a lot faster than version 2. And speaking of hair, so the hair in Maxwell uses a parametric cone-shaped object. Okay, so it has a real thickness, and this means that you can apply any Maxwell material to the hair, including transparent materials, so you can get really very realistic looking hair with translucency and so on. But in most cases you don't actually need it, and you can simplify the materials a lot For example, in this case, I used a sort of a metallic gold material actually, which is opaque, but because of the nice and precise GI in Maxwell, you can see all the nice shading that goes on here, and it almost looks translucent, but the material itself isn't, you know. So you can still get a very good look without necessarily having to use translucency or transparency for the material. So in version 3 we also added a hair material assistant, which lets you very quickly create different types of hair, and it mimics the look of the Marshner hair shading. So you get a secondary and a primary highlight control, and you can also create your own presets. So it looks like this. Here I have 2 of these hair presets with new hair preview scenes, and by default Maxwell ships with these hair presets, and you have a control basically over the root tip colors, the primary highlight and the secondary highlight, which is shifted from the roots, just like in the Marshner paper. And at any time you can also convert this preset or this assistant, you can convert it to the advanced version, and you can go ahead and change all of the BSDFs that it actually has. So here's the glint control, secondary highlights, primary highlights, and so on. So you have a lot of control over the hair shading. But really, in my opinion, it's best to keep it simple and start off with very simple materials, because as you saw, you can get very realistic looks with a simple material. And also we have many hair systems supported, so we have shave and haircut, hair farm, Ornatrix also in Max, and let's see, yeah, so that's it about hair and hair rendering. And by the way, people seem to think that you need some sort of transparency at the roots or at the tips. I hear people saying this a lot, but actually if you look at a real hair, it doesn't turn suddenly transparent at the root or at the tips. You know, that's just an old way of doing things to make them look somewhat realistic. But in Maxwell, you don't have to do that, you know. It's just don't use any hair or tip transparency or root transparency. It's going to look correct because of the accurate GI. So you don't have to do those kinds of tricks anymore. So moving on, we have the implementation of Pixar Open Subdivision now, and this is pretty cool. It means that you can have a very light scene which you can animate, and then at render time it's going to subdivide those that geometry for you. And just to quickly show you how it works in Softimage again, if we make a cube, sorry, I'm going to try not to move too fast because I see the screen lags a little bit. So it works as an object modifier. So in Softimage, at least, you go to Property and Maxwell Subdivision. Okay. And I guess in Maya and 3D Max it works in a similar way. It's an object modifier, and you can choose the catmull method or loop method. And loop works best if you have triangularized meshes. Okay, so if they're quads, then use catmull. And then you have the edge creasing. I can just do a preview of this in Fire. Okay, so you can see how that looks, and you can increase the
Mihai.
Creasing, the edge creasing. Yeah.
There's a question about, is it only open subdivs, or can you render regular subdivs too?
No, you can render regular subdivs too. So, for example, if I duplicate this cube and I remove the Maxwell subdivision, and instead I'm just going to subdivide it using the Softimage subdivision, then it works as well. you know, it's supported. It works the same in 3D Max and Maya. Right. I guess that answers the question.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, so that's the Pixar subdivision implementation, and moving on. So I have a lot of things to cover. So the deep compositing support, we added support for output to EXR deep files or DTEX files. And as you can see, for now, this format is only supported in Nuke, but you know, probably in the future it's going to be available in other compositors like After Effects or Smoke or whatever. And you can either output the alpha channel, the deep alpha channel, or you can output also a full RGBA deep image. You can see in this example, oops, this is the actual render, and with the deep data inside of Nuke, you can actually, you know, isolate these objects, and here you can see that you can then composite another render, which is at another depth. So really, this makes it so much more easy to composite things. You don't have to mess with alphas and getting funny edges at the alphas, because everything is separated by depth. So it really becomes really easy and fast and accurate to composite things together by depth this way. And just to show you quickly where those output options are, so they're in the render options. It's just a new channel here, a new output. So where all the rest of the channels are, like shadow, material ID, now you get a deep channel, and here you can choose DTEX, EXR deep, and if you want the alpha or RGBA. And you also have the settings to specify, you know, what's the minimum distance between samples, and in total how many samples you want in the file, because these deep EXR files, they can get very big very quickly the more samples you have. So yeah, that's the deep compositing support. And now talking a little bit about the Maxwell pipeline, some unique things to Maxwell, and you know, a new way to look at, or a new way to work with compositing and rendering in general when you use Maxwell. So usually we talk about the progressive rendering workflow, and this means that you can actually start your post-production or your compositing while Maxwell is still rendering. And this works because those MXI files that Maxwell creates, those image format files, they're getting incrementally better as the sampling level increases. But you can start using those MXI files, you can import them using our plugins for Nuke and After Effects and Photoshop. You can import those files and start working with them, and then when a new sampling level is reached, you can just reload that footage and you get a better view of what the file looks like with all your edits still there in the compositor. And by the way, those plugins are free with every license of Maxwell. So just to show you quickly in theory, or well in practice also, how this could work. So that scene I showed you with the ship through the clouds, okay, that animation. For example, let me quickly just add as an example. So this is the network rendering in Maxwell, but it works also with third-party render managers. So when I add an animation job, or it could also be a cooperative job. So I add that sequence, Okay, and instead of just simply specifying a final sampling level, I specify instead SL updates, so sampling level updates. And here you can specify, as many as you want. So let's say 5, and then 10, and then the final sampling level. So what Maxwell is going to do now is it's going to render all the files in the sequence to sampling level 5, and then it's going to start over again, but now it's going to render from sampling level 5 to sampling level 10, because with Maxwell you can resume a render. So anytime you have an MXI file, you can at any time resume that render. Okay, so let's say you render to sampling level 5, and then 6 months later, well, let's say 1 month later, you want to add some sampling levels to that file. You just load it, and Maxwell knows that there's already an MXI file. It's going to ask you, do you want to resume this render, or do you want to start over again? So that's what it's going to do. It's going to resume from level 5 to level 10, and then a third time from level 10 to level 18. And what this means is that it's going to reach sampling level 5 very, very quickly. So you can have your sequence, in a few minutes. If you have a render farm, in a few minutes you can already start the compositing and have a pretty good idea of what the final lighting is going to be. It's just going to look a little bit more noisy. And then when it reaches sample level 10, you just reload that footage in your compositor. Well, I don't have time to show you this right now, but if I create...
Hey, Mihai, real quick.
Yeah.
Is the SL update a flag that you can throw in deadline?
Yes, you can do that. I think it's supported, the SL update thing.
Okay.
Right, so I'm just going to import those MXI files, and you can see in After Effects the plugin adds these features to After Effects, so it knows it's a Maxwell Render sequence, and I'm just going to reinterpret the footage because it seems it thinks it's non-square pixels. That simplifies things a lot, which is going to create automatically the compositions for you and split up the multi-light. If you have multi-light enabled and you have several lights in the scene, it's going to automatically create the right compositions for you. But if you don't want to do that, you also have a feature here which is called the MXI extractor, which you apply to a sequence. Sorry. Let's just move this into a composition, and I apply it to the sequence directly. And here you can choose which channel you want to extract from that MXI sequence. So for example, if you have object ID enabled, then you can extract it and just use that, or multi-light, and you can choose then which buffer of the multi-light you want to extract. Okay, so that's one way of working with MXI files in your compositor, but I find it a lot easier to just select it, and at least in After Effects, I guess it's pretty similar in Nuke and at least. You have the option here to create Maxwell MXI comps directly. So it's going to create a folder for you, and here you have, first of all, a composition with all the layers in the file. And you also have a multi-light composition. The multi-light composition automatically sets the blending mode to linear dodge. So you have to do this in order for the multi-light to work properly. And also, don't forget that if you're working directly with 32-bit MXI files or 32-bit EXR files, you need to set the project to 32-bit, and I think I used sRGB here, also to linearize the working space, because the output from Maxwell is linear. Okay, so then you're going to get the correct look in the preview here. Okay, so imagine now that this sequence was only around SL5. Okay, so I can start doing my adjustments here, the color corrections and things like that. And then when Maxwell tells me that it's reached a new sampling level, so it's reached the next level, sampling level 10, then I can just right-click here and replace footage. I can replace it with itself. It's just going to update it while, all my settings here are going to be intact, all the effects and layers I add. So this is a very cool feature because it means, you can overlap the time the compositors can start working while Maxwell is still rendering. You don't have to wait, for each of these steps to complete, and then you can see, oh, okay, well, maybe the lighting here isn't so good, or there were supposed to be 2 ships or something like that. You don't have to wait for the entire sequence of renders to finish. You can just wait until a low sampling level, and if you see a mistake, you stop it right away and you restart. And
Hey Mihai,
okay,
is
for
there a
example,
similar
yeah,
gizmo for Nuke?
yeah, it works exactly the same way in Nuke. You have the MXI interpreter, so it loads the MXI sequences. Or if you don't want to work with MXI files because they can be pretty heavy, they're always 32-bit, and that can be overkill in many cases. You can also export to EXR half float, so 16-bit, and you can choose in the render options. Here in the multi-light options, instead of composite, which means that it's going to embed all the lights in one file, you can choose a separate output here. So for each light in the scene, it's going to export a separate EXR file. And then you can load all those separate EXR files in After Effects or Nuke, and then just do the same thing here. You set them to linear dodge, and you have the same multi-light functionality as you would have if you just import the MXI directly. So it's just, it depends if you have a fast enough computer and you have enough memory, depending on the resolution, of course. I find it more convenient to just work with the MXI files directly. But for efficiency's sake, and also 32-bit may be overkill in many cases, then work with the XR files and export them as separate lights here for each of the lights in the render options. So again, since we have the full multi-light functionality, I can turn off a layer. So here, for example, I'm turning off, the physical sky and the sun, and also I have an exposure control for the emitters in the front. So again, I can play with this a long time, like so, and well, you get the idea. So this is a really cool control, and easy, most of all, and accurate in post-production. All right, so that's really the essence really of what we mean when we say with this progressive rendering workflow. So I know for many people they're very fixed at working in a certain way because they've been doing that for years. But we're saying think about this a little bit differently. First of all, you don't need 200 render layers to make a mediocre render look pretty. Basically with Maxwell, all you need is many times a contrast control because the output is linear, so you have to first of all increase the contrast levels and so on. It may be some slight color correction, but that's basically it. I mean, you don't have to do any more than that. And the second advantage is that if you show your boss, what the final look is going to be at an early stage, that can possibly mean that you have less changes to do later, because if you show them a really crappy render that's not going to have anything to do with the final render, when they see the final render, then they're going to realize that something is wrong and the lighting needs to be changed or things like that. With Maxwell, you can just render a sequence very quickly to a very low sampling level, and you get a very accurate idea of what the rendering is going to look like. Just it's going to be noisy. So yeah, again, we have the plugins for Nuke, After Effects, and Photoshop. And multi-light inside the compositing application. And also we have a bunch of new channels for version 3, especially custom alphas, which I'm going to show you in a bit. The shadow channel, of course, which takes into account also multi-light. So for example, if you turn off a light in the render, then the shadow channel is going to react to that, or if you mix different lights. So again, this can happen in real time in the render window. You can also change this later, as long as you have the MXI file. We also added the UV channel now, so you can get the UVs of the object and also the normals and position channels in version 3. So again, about the Alembic support, I already showed you a little bit of how that works. So we support object cameras, particles, and again, material assignments. And it's also compatible with the Crate suite of Alembic plugins from Exocortex. And again, like I mentioned, it's if the ABC file contains references to material names and you have those materials with the same name in your scene, then when you import this ABC file, it's going to automatically get those materials applied to it. So I think it's worth mentioning also that in many ways the Alembic support works already with the MXS references we had. We had this functionality in version 2 as well. And I guess the advantage to MXS references is that you can use them also in applications that don't have a Alembic plugin or Alembic support at all. You can still load those references. A disadvantage, I guess, is that the MXS references don't support animated files. So, yeah. Moving on. How much time? Let's see. Okay. Well.
A couple other questions real quick. Where do you set half float?
Render up. So yeah, you probably saw this maybe already if you looked at the version 3 feature page. So this is the Maxwell C functionality, which is actually straight from RealFlow, but now you can use it directly in Maxwell in most of the plugins actually. Even you can use it in SolidWorks and Rhino and things like that. And so it uses the Ocean Statistical Spectrum Ocean Solver found in RealFlow. And just to show you maybe quickly here, how it works. And so this is in Studio, so you load it as a extension object, Maxwell C. Just make it a little bit bigger. Then you have the quality settings. So this is basically how many polygons it's going to create at render time and how detailed the waves are going to be. And vertical scale and wavelength, choppiness, etc. And in Softimage it works basically in the same way. So you go to Primitive, Maxwell C, and then it creates a mesh, and this mesh has a custom operator with the same settings basically here. And you also have a display quality for the viewport, so it doesn't slow it down too much, and also a separate render quality. And actually, you can get a very good sea look. Maybe I exaggerated a little bit there. Let's turn on choppiness. Regarding material setup, okay, so if I just do a quick fire preview of this, it's just going to have a default material, and you know, let's do a nice ocean shading setup in about 30 seconds. Oops, sorry, my mouse is going crazy. So I'm going to apply Maxwell layered material, and I'm going to set the roughness to 0. I'm going to let it reload. Sorry, let me. Okay, so that's basically what I did for the material. I just decreased the roughness actually, and doesn't even have any transparency here. You know, if it's a deep ocean, I don't think that's needed. So you can play around with the actual shininess. You make it darker. Maybe a little blue. You know, something like that. So, you know, we can very quickly get pretty decent results with this. And of course, it's animated. So if you animate your timeline, then the waves are going to get animated as well. Yeah, so that's the Maxwell C. So again, this is a primitive, this is an object. You can apply it to an object, it's an object by itself, it's a primitive. And yes, the fire voxelization, well, this is not really something specific to visual effects or things like that. It's just, it's worth mentioning because it allows you to be much more efficient when you create your scenes, when you set up the lighting and so on. It's much more efficient to work with the preview engine, Fire, now in version 3. Just to quickly show you an example of this, maybe. Let me see where I did that. So first I'm going to show you what it looked like in version 2. So this is version 2. And you can see now I clicked the fire button, and then it takes a little bit of time before it voxelizes. So these are references, 2 references of a pretty heavy model done in SolidWorks. It's pretty heavy geometry, and there are 2 of them. And now it appeared. And let's say in version 2 you wanted to relight the scene, so I moved this emitter here. The problem is that now it has to revoxelize the whole scene before you can see a preview again, and if the scene is heavy, like in this case, then it's going to take a little bit of time to do that. You can see that now it's starting to revoxelize and so on. So each time you move something in the scene, you have to wait like this. which was pretty annoying. So now if I stop that, and we can take a look at the exact same scene in version 3. And now when I hit fire, you can see first of all that it's much faster at the first voxelization. And now when I move the emitter, you can see that, boom, that's, you know, it's instant now. So you can move and rotate the emitter to relight your scene. It's just gonna revoxelize that part that moved, that changed. So you can see that it's pretty much instant. So this is really a nice improvement in version 3. It makes your work much faster when you set up the scenes and set up the lighting. Okay. Next up is exclusive lights, and this is could be interesting for visual effects, characters, stuff like that. So now you can choose, you know, which emitters should influence which object in the scene, and I'm going to show you this in Studio, but it works pretty much the same way in all the plugins. Oops. Start again. There's something wrong. Let's close After Effects. It's too much memory. Okay, so here I have a pretty basic scene with a bottle and with several emitters around it. So if I do a preview render of this, see what it looks like. And let's say, for example, I like the lighting of this emitter. I like it on bottle. It gives this long shape here, this long highlight, but it makes the label blown out, so I don't see the text on the label anymore. So to block this emitter for the label, it's really simple. You just select the object, and under the appearance section, it may be a little bit different in the plugins, but I can show you in Softimage. So here you can add which emitters should not influence this object. So I choose this one. Okay, so now you can see that this large emitter here at the left, it still shows the highlight on the same we can do for this emitter here, for example, that we don't want visible in the bottle. It's just a little distracting. So we can select the bottle, and I guess this is plane 1. Add this one. And now you can see that this emitter is no longer reflecting in the bottle. Okay, so that's blocked emitters, and in Softimage, for example, you add a mesh property or mesh attribute to the object, and here you have the same functionality, so you can add an emitter or remove the emitter. Alright, so it's you add a property in Maxwell mesh attributes, and this contains a lot more stuff like height to camera, height to secondary rays, and it also contains the blocked emitters. So new also in version 3 are the custom alphas, and this lets you add as many alpha layers as you want, and you can also choose which objects you want to appear in the layer. So just to quickly show you this, it's pretty straightforward. So I'm showing you this in Studio, but it's the same way in Softimage and other plugins. You can see that it's a mesh property, and here you can add the custom channels. Okay, And the custom channels, you create them from the render options. The channels here. And here at the bottom you can add my channel. So this is a new alpha channel, and now this object can use that channel here. You can enable it for it or not. So in Studio, for example, if I do render options, custom alphas, okay, so first you need to add a new channel, so add a new channel, and then you can choose which objects should be part of that new channel, for example. Okay, when I render this, I'm going to get the main alpha channel, which in this case is white because I didn't hide the background, and also the custom alpha channel that I created. Okay, so that's pretty useful, very straightforward to use. And again, all these extra channels are embedded in the MXI file, so all you need basically is the MXI file in many cases. You know, if you have enough RAM and the resolution is not very high, it's much easier to just handle everything with MXI files, import them into your compositor and work with the MXI files directly. And a bunch of other stuff that can be useful. So we're focusing a lot now on the extensions API. So this means you know, geometry shaders, new procedurals. You're going to be able to create your own procedurals, which you can use with Maxwell. Like I mentioned, the new 2.0 EXR support and half-float support, the fire voxelization, the UV channel. So again, this is a channel found in the render options, which is going to render the UV map of the objects. You can remap or you can reapply an image to that object in your compositor using the UVs of the object, so that the new image sticks correctly to the object. The fast multi-light, you saw that. Actually, let me show you this a little bit more detail. So here's a new. I'm not a Star Wars freak. I just didn't have time to create some models for this, so I just took them from that website. So before in version 2 you had this little preview, and when you made a change you just saw the little preview and you had to press refresh. So now everything is happening in the main render view here. Okay, so you can turn on scattering. So this is showing the constant density functionality, and this is actually the Maxwell C. So of course you can use it for terrain as well. That can be cool. So you can see now how nice it is to just see the updates right away in the main viewport. And again, you can see how all the lights react realistically to the environment, to the volumetrics. I mean, you can see how they create these beams of light. And by the way, a small tip, you saw that you can change the actual slider range. So if you reach the maximum, you can just right click, change slider range, and here you can add more to it. And then it's going to ask you if you want to set the same value to all the sliders or increase the range for all. In this case I choose no, because I just want to increase the range of this one. So you can solo light. So here I'm soloing just the physical sky, just the sun. Now I'm soloing both the sun and the emitters. Yeah, so the fast multi-light feature is pretty cool, and even the scattering is supported. The the ISO, even diffraction, you can do that in real time in the main render viewport now. All right. Yeah, and we also moved to RLM licensing, so this can be very convenient for if you have many machines, you want to keep the licensing updated, and you want to know exactly who's using what and so on. You can manage the licensing a lot easier for larger installations. And finally, I think I forgot to mention, yeah, so the volumetrics, we got an interesting question. It works it works underwater too. So here's a quick example I made. So this is underwater volumetrics, and these are actually two sea objects, Maxwell sea objects. One is transparent, the other one has like a sand texture, and the sun is shining above. And the whole thing is encompassed by a constant volumetric cube. Okay, and you can see that you get, first of all, the nice caustics coming from the water, and also the colors attenuate realistically. So you can see that the red, I mean, because the volumetric has a blue or bluish material to it, the red color is going to attenuate faster. It's going to basically start looking very quickly like the blue. You're not going to distinguish it so well. So I had this scene here. I can show you the setup. Okay, so this is it. So it's two Maxwell C objects. This one has just a transparent material on it, and the other one a sort of sand color to it. And okay, so this is the camera, these are the cubes, and it's pretty big, so the volume attenuates nicely, and this here is the constant density volume. So it's just a cube with, and here you can set how dense it should be. Let me see, I can show you this also. It works very similar in Softimage and Maya. Again, in 3D Max it's the same approach. What's this one? Okay, so this scene, this is that render I showed you before with the multi-light. So again, it's the constant density volume, which you can reach from primitive Maxwell volumetric object. You can rescale it. Where is it? There it is. This represents like 1 kilometer of Maxwell C. And then again, to this volumetric object, to the cube, I simply applied a Lambert material, okay, which is just white, and so it gave me this nice render. And for the emitters, I just extracted these polygons and applied an emitter material to them. That's it. And then turn on multi-light from the render options. Yeah, and again for this underwater one, I just applied a very slight cyan or blue material to it, which is again is just a regular Lambert material. But just doing that created this nice light fall off and coloration on the water. So again, because it's blue, it's going to let the blue wavelengths of light pass through it, while the other ones are going to be absorbed faster, so you get a realistic underwater color absorption effect. Right, so yeah, I think that's about it. It's about an hour. I feel like I'm talking to myself, but well, I am talking to myself.
We have
Yeah,
a bunch
that's
of
it.
questions, Mihai. If you want to, just we can start going through those. The first one is, are all of these features available in the Lightwave plugin?
In the Lightwave plugin, yeah. I mean, take a look at our forums. We have a dedicated Lightwave forum, and yes, I think most of them are available in Lightwave as well. Yes.
Okay. Another one is, this one's, what's the advantage of using Maxwell compared to V-Ray, Arnold, etc., in your opinion?
Well, hopefully this webinar shows you some advantages. Again, I'm mentioning the progressive rendering workflow, and also, well, personally, when I see people doing render tests online and saying, look at this, it just took 30 seconds to render this, but it looks like crap. You can't sell that, To do a finished image, you have to do a lot of work. You have to do, many tricks and so on. What I like about Maxwell is that you don't have to use any tricks. You can still hide an object to camera, for example. There's still these practical things, but you don't need to do any tricks. You can just think about it as how would light interact in the real world, and then just do it in Maxwell. One example, this image, this is a light painting image. This is actually not a cheat. This is actually motion blur, a very long shutter set to the Maxwell camera, and then I have an animated emitter which moves along a curve here. So it just works as it would in the real world. That's what I like about it. And it's very accurate, and considering all the things it's doing, all the lighting interactions that it's calculating, it's pretty fast actually. And you save a lot of time in post-production. Yeah.
Okay. What about, will the promised Maya Fluids support for volumetrics be released soon?
Yeah, I mean, you should really ask that to the plugin developers. I think they're very busy with other things at the moment, but hopefully it gets added very soon. Because it was supposed to work also in the release, to work with Maya Fluids and volumetrics, but maybe they're already working on OpenVDB support and things like that. But nag them, post in the forums, because they're very active there. They actually do check the post there very often. So if you have a question, post it in the Maya forum and they'll get back to you.
Okay. Can the GPU acceleration that allow the real-time work in Maxwell Render be applied to the Nuke and AE plugins so we can work with MXIs faster?
Well, actually, that depends entirely on, that's not the same thing, because when they're loaded in After Effects or Nuke, then that's Nuke that takes over, so to speak. It's not the multi-light I showed you. That's just After Effects, and it's a bit slow for me because I have a crap graphics card. It doesn't take into account CUDA, but it's going to be a lot faster. Well, I can't do that. I don't have time to do the thing again. But no, that's After Effects. That doesn't affect it in the compositors, the timeline and the effects and all that. Because it's just a normal effect. You saw that. It's just like an image. You have a 32-bit image and you add an exposure effect to it. That's basically your multi-light control. That's all. Yeah. So I mean, if you have a graphics card that supports CUDA, And that depends on After Effects, on Nuke, if they support it and how well they support it.
Okay. Where do you set the half float?
It's in the render options. In the oops. So I guess it depends on the it depends on the main application, but you can set it here, for example, EXR. Well, it looks like Softimage doesn't have 16-bit yet output, but it's in the output options when you choose the output options in Maya or 3D Max. That's where you set it. Yeah.
Okay.
Anybody there?
Do you know, is it possible to render just a volumetric pass that you can composite in Nuke After Effects?
No, you can't do that. You would have to do a separate pass in that case. Because like you saw, I mean, the volumetric, it's not a separate thing. It's part of the scene. That's why it interacts with everything in the scene, all the lighting in the scene. So again, this is for free, so to speak. It's not a separate thing. So no, it's not you can't do it as a separate pass.
Okay. This guy's asking, I'd love to have more calibrated preview scenes, such as your hair lock scene. Are there going to be more added in the future?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I did those pretty. They were rushed a little bit. The hair assistant here, and you can see that there are two new preview scenes for hair, and they're actually a little bit too heavy, I think, because one of them just represents like 2 centimeters of hair, but I think I added a bit too many hairs. But yeah, I mean, I was thinking of adding a little bit more presets for hair. It's not a problem. And by the way, you can also, we're going to add this to the documentation. You can also do your own presets here, so they appear in this list here with the presets. And that works now also for everything. So all the material assistant, like the translucent type, you can see that this one also has presets. You can also add your own presets there, and we're going to show you in the docs how to do that. It's very easy. Also for grass, you can add grass presets, things like that. Yeah. And actually, please check out these material assistants. So you have a transparent, metal, translucent. It makes it a lot faster to work with Maxwell. And even if you're already very familiar with the material system, this can actually save you some time because it's very simple to create different looks and different kinds of materials. And they're not actually lower quality because behind the scenes, it's the same material system that works. We just simplified the UI to automate some things behind the scenes.
Okay.
Like you want to. No, like for example, you want a red tinted glass. It's just a matter of what's going on. I think I'm rendering something. Yeah.
Next question.
Yeah.
Do you have any plans to support the Yeti hair system? You might not know that
People
one.
have been asking us for that, and yeah, I'm not sure personally. It depends on them also. It depends on what they choose to expose to software developers, but I guess, yeah, it should be taken into account.
Yeah, okay.
At
This
least
guy's
a
asking
lot of
if I change material, won't
developers
there
know
be
that.
voxelization? I'm not sure exactly what he's referring to. If you're still on, Michael, let me know what you're talking about exactly. I'll go on to the next one for now. This one's another, would it be possible to get a better fire for Cinema 4D? If you move lights, you have to resend the scene to fire.
Well, maybe that's a plugin bug then, but I mean, if you change a geometry, then yeah, it's gonna have to send that change to Fire, but as I showed, it's gonna be a lot faster in version 3 because it's just gonna send the change of that single object. It's not gonna say change, it's not gonna send the entire scene again. So if it does send the entire scene again, then maybe it's a bug in the Cinema 4D plugin, and you should post in the C4D forum in that case with an example scene. That's even better.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can Maxwell V3 render real flow mist particles?
Yeah, sure. I mean, any bin file that contains particles, you can now you can render it in Maxwell. So you can either render them as straight particles, like you saw those little spheres, or you can just load them up in the volumetric object. So if I put this up, and you can see the volumetric object. So it has 3 types: the constant, noise 3D, and particle based. So I would just choose particle based, and then I would choose the mist file that contains the real flow particles, and I use that. So yeah, it works.
Okay. Let's see. What's the best way of making sure that you're working with realistic light levels? It's kind of a question with many answers, but
Yeah, I guess I see a lot of people making the mistake that they forget that in real life it's actually the camera that controls the exposure, you know. So the first thing you should do is work with realistic camera settings, you know. Don't set the f-stop to 200, you know. There aren't any lenses that have an f-stop of 200. Most of them on DSLRs, and they go up to maybe 21, 22, okay? And then also take care of the shutter speed and ISO. So first, set those settings to real settings, and then specify the emitter strength. And remember that, you know, sunlight, a day scene is a lot brighter than if you have a night scene with a small lamp or something. You know, in the real world, you would have to change the settings. Maybe have a shutter speed of 10 and an f-stop of 1.2 or an ISO of 300 to have that little lamp visible. But then if you render with those settings in the bright daylight settings, then you're just going to get a very overexposed render, or white render basically. So think about the camera first, and then about the emitter parameters. Because again, with Maxwell, the emitters are made to work with real-world values. So if you have a light bulb, for example, you know that it's a 40-watt light bulb, and it has an efficiency of about 17 lumens per watt. These are the settings. Okay, and some manufacturers give you these numbers. Then just enter those numbers, and if you see that your render is completely black or almost black, then don't start changing this and setting it to, you know, 10,000 watts. There aren't any light bulbs with 10,000 watts. Then go to the camera instead. Okay, go to the camera exposure settings. Yeah. Oh, and actually, maybe this is interesting. Also regarding VFX, is that now we have a bunch of new lenses, especially the pinhole here. This works without depth of field. So if you choose pinhole lens here, it's not going to give you any depth of field. So that can be pretty useful especially when you're doing test renders and things like that. You don't need that depth of field effects. Or if you're rendering very small objects and depth of field just gets in the way. So thin lens, that's the way it's worked up till now. And now you have pinhole, fisheye, and also spherical. So you can create these nice HDR images for lighting, for example, from your scene. Yeah.
Okay, we probably have time for 2 more questions, and then just any question that we don't get to right now, I'll have Mihai or someone from Next Limit answer, and I'll just get back to you via email. But 2 more real quick here. Is the Maxwell C tileable, like for a big ocean scene?
Well, tileable, you can make it as big as you need, and then it's actually from the Maxwell C settings that you can then specify, this tile, how big of a patch of C does it represent in the real world. So in this example, I've set it to 125 meters. So if you wanted to represent 1 kilometer, let me set the vertical scale smaller. So that's the way to do it. It doesn't have really any tiling, because then you would start seeing repeating patterns. You just scale first the plane as big as you want, and then you can also specify the dimension that this patch should represent in the real world. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, 1 more. Let's see. Well, to get back to that other question about the voxelization, he's asking if you change material on the object and update fire preview, won't there be extra voxelization?
No, then it doesn't need to revoxelize because the geometry itself hasn't changed. It's only if you have a displacement material applied and it has a heavy displacement, which would change the height a lot, then it needs to revoxelize, because the actual geometry has changed. But if it's just materials, then no, it doesn't need to revoxelize. So you can change the material color in real time. Let me just show you quickly. Yeah, cube. It's not the best example, but so now I have fire running, and now I can change the light, I can change the colors, I can change the textures. You can see it's happening in real time. Doesn't need to send the scene again to revoxelize. Yeah.
Okay, I think that's all we have time for right now. Like I said, I see a few people are asking about a Maxwell 3 and Cinema 4D webinar, so I'll see what I can do on that. See if we can put something together there. And any other questions that haven't been answered here, I will have Mihai try to answer those via email and get back to you guys. And as far as the promo, anyone who attended this webinar, we're offering 20% off Maxwell, I believe, until next Wednesday. I have to double check on that. It's a pretty short period of time. It's only a few days, but it's 20% off any new licenses. So email me directly if you are interested, and I can get you a quote over. My email is brad@motionmedia.com. That's brad@motionmedia.com. And I see there's a question about the promo valid in Sweden. To be perfectly honest, I'm not exactly sure if we can sell worldwide or if we're restricted to the U.S. I'll have to find that out, but email me and I'll find out and I'll let you know. Because obviously if we can sell it, then definitely anybody anywhere in the world is more than welcome to purchase it. So yeah, 20% off. Email me, Brad@Motion Media. And again, just want to say thanks to everybody for coming, and thanks Mihai. Great job. I hope everybody learned a little something here.
Thank you. Yeah, I hope so. At least get them motivated to download the demo and give it a try, and let us know how you like it.
Yeah, yeah.
It's the future.
And this will be, we're going to throw this up on our YouTube channel too, so I'll send out a reminder email with the 20% off info and a link to go ahead and watch it on our YouTube channel if you want as well. But that's it. I'll let Mihai go relax now since I know it's late. And thanks again, everybody, for coming.
I need to drink something. Again, my throat's parched.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Okay. Thanks. Good night.
All right. Bye.